The summer of 1842 in Alabama was oppressively still. On Rosefield Plantation, the air hung thick, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Nothing stirred, not the cotton fields, not the magnolia, not even the cicadas. Something terrible was about to happen. Betsy, a 34-year-old enslaved woman, stood hidden in the shadows near the big house. Her hands, hardened from years of labor, gripped her work dress. Her eyes had seen horrors no one should endure. She had learned long ago that silence was her armor and invisibility her weapon. Tonight, however, invisibility would serve a different purpose. At the edge of the slave quarters stood the smokehouse, a squat oak building, weathered gray from years of smoke. During the day, it was for curing meat, but Betsy knew its true purpose. It was where Overseer Harlon took women when he wanted privacy for his cruelty. She had endured it countless times, fracturing her mind to survive. But tonight, the smokehouse would tell a new story. For 5 years, Betsy had watched, learned, and planned. Every pattern, every weakness of Harlon's, every small misstep, she noted. Rage had fermented into purpose. Tonight, she would act. Betsy waited in the shadows as Harlon emerged from the main house, adjusting his belt, massive and cruel. She stepped into the moonlight, her face calm, her voice just the right mix of fear and urgency. "Mr. Harlon, sir," she called softly, "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's trouble in the smokehouse." Harlon's pale eyes lit up with arrogance. He never faced consequences. He never denied himself what he wanted. "Show me," he growled, stepping down from the porch. Betsy led the way, slow enough to maintain control, fast enough not to raise suspicion. "What do you think Betsy is planning inside the smokehouse? Comment your guess below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see what happens next." Betsy led Harlon to the smokehouse, her heart calm but her mind racing. The door stood slightly ajar, just as she had left it. Inside, the interior was pitch black, except for the faint red glow of coals in the fire pit. The smell was acrid, soaked into every board and beam, a reminder of the countless times she had suffered here. Harlon stepped in first, arrogance in every movement. "I don't smell anything wrong," he said, voice confident. "Where's this spoiled?" Betsy didn't respond. In one swift motion, she slammed the heavy oak door, the sound echoing like thunder. Her hands shook as she slid the iron bolt into place. Harlon roared and pounded against the door, but it was too late. "What the hell, Betsy? Open this door," he screamed, his voice cracking. She stayed calm, her voice steady, every pretense of fear gone. "What you gonna do that you ain't already done?" she asked, watching his shadow flail through the ventilation slits. Through years of suffering, she knew exactly how smoke would affect him. She reached for the bucket of hot coals she had prepared, and one by one, pushed them through the slits into the fire pit inside. The room filled with thick, choking smoke. Harlon's roars became desperate gasps. "Please, I'll give you anything. Freedom papers, money, just let me out," he begged. Betsy paused, her eyes cold, unyielding. She spoke softly, almost a whisper to the smokehouse itself. "You remember Sarah, 15 years old when you started with her. You remember Dinah, silent for 3 years after what you did. Remember me, Mr. Aaron." The fire grew hotter, the smoke thicker. Harlon crawled frantically inside, looking for an escape, but there was none. Betsy's years of pain had transformed into a weapon, justice in the form of smoke and fire. Outside, the plantation slept, oblivious to the reckoning happening in the small wooden building at the edge of the quarters. Betsy watched, breathing steady, as the smoke twisted into the night sky like a signal, like vengeance itself taking flight. Do you think Harlon will survive Betsy's plan? Comment your guess. Inside the smokehouse, the heat intensified. The thick gray smoke choked Harlon, making his coughing uncontrollable. He pounded on the door, but the bolt held firm. Panic replaced his arrogance. He had never imagined that the invisible slave he had tormented for years could become the one to punish him. Betsy moved calmly outside, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the fire pit. Every step she took was deliberate, measured. The years of suffering, the stolen dignity, and the lost childhood of her daughter had all led to this moment. Her eyes were steady, but inside, her heart carried every scream, every injustice she had endured. She continued feeding hot coals through the slits, the smoke filling the room. She watched his shadow flail against the walls, each movement confirming the power had shifted. The overseer who had once held complete control now fought for breath, for survival, for mercy that he had never granted to others. Outside the smokehouse, the night was eerily silent. Not a single slave stirred. They had learned long ago that survival meant seeing nothing, hearing nothing, saying nothing. But in whispered tones that night, Betsy's name began to circulate, a name that would inspire awe and fear alike. "Remember all the women you broke, all the children you scarred," she muttered softly, almost to herself. The fire roared, the coals glowing brighter, and the thick smoke began to escape through the cracks in the roof. Harlon's pleas grew frantic, losing their cadence in the choking smoke. At the edge of the quarters, old Moses watched from the barn, nearly blind. He could not see the details, but he understood the outcome was inevitable. Betsy had waited years for this night, years of planning, years of watching, years of holding rage as her only companion. The smokehouse was no longer a place of oppression. It had become a monument of justice, a silent testament to the courage and determination of a woman who refused to remain invisible any longer. Do you think anyone will discover what Betsy did, or will she escape unseen? By midnight, the smoke had thickened, curling out from the ventilation slits like grey fingers searching the sky. Harlon's shouts were barely audible through the choking haze. The heat was now intense, forcing him to stumble blindly inside the smokehouse. His once commanding presence was reduced to desperate, panicked movements. Betsy remained outside, her silhouette steady in the moonlight. Every coil of smoke was a reminder of the years of injustice, the stolen youth, the pain of her fellow women, the cruelty that had gone unpunished. Tonight, she would rewrite the rules. The overseer had become the lesson. In the quarters, the slaves held their breaths, knowing this was not just a personal act of vengeance, it was a statement. Betsy's courage, her calculated defiance, became a ripple that ran through the plantation. It whispered of power reclaimed and oppression challenged. Through the slits, Betsy pushed the last handful of hot coals into the fire pit. Harlon's coughing grew frantic. He clawed at the walls, searching for an escape, but there was none. Every movement was desperate, every gasp for air a reminder of his hubris. At the edge of the plantation, faint rustling in the woods went unnoticed. Betsy had already prepared an escape path. Her plan was meticulous: fire to distract, smoke to suffocate, and the shadows to hide her flight. Her freedom was within reach, but only if she stayed calm and precise. The night air carried the smell of smoke and iron. To the untrained eye, it was just a fire. But to those who had endured and witnessed oppression, it was the first crack in the wall of fear, a warning that power could be challenged and justice could be claimed, even in silence. Would you have had the courage to confront Harlon the way Betsy did? The smokehouse trembled as Harlon's desperation reached a fever pitch. Inside, he pounded against the oak walls, his shouts swallowed by the thick grey smoke. His arrogance had never prepared him for someone like Betsy, someone who knew patience, observation, and timing as weapons sharper than any blade. Outside, Betsy remained calm, her eyes scanning the night. She knew the patrols from the town would eventually come searching, but her meticulous planning accounted for that. Every step, every movement had been rehearsed for years in silence. She had studied Harlon, memorized his routines, understood the plantation's rhythms, and tonight all that knowledge became her armor. A distant owl hooted, a sound swallowed quickly by the crackling fire inside. Betsy's hands moved with precision, pushing the coals further into the smokehouse. She whispered names: Sarah, Dinah, the girls he had harmed, all of them living in her memory. Each ember became a testament to the cruelty endured and the justice being claimed. Minutes dragged like hours. The night remained silent except for the groaning of Harlon trapped inside and the subtle sounds of the plantation's natural life, rustling leaves, distant horses, and the occasional creak of a cabin settling. Betsy's breath was steady, heart focused, mind clear. There was no hesitation, no doubt. She had waited 5 long years for this moment. Then she heard it, a change in the smokehouse's interior. Harlon's movements grew slower, more frantic but weaker. Betsy allowed herself a small, quiet smile. The plan had worked exactly as intended. Justice had been delivered in a way that no one could dispute, no one could challenge. Harlon had underestimated her, and that mistake would be his last. Outside the smokehouse, the night remained calm. The first hints of dawn were still hours away, but for Betsy, the world had already shifted. Freedom, even if temporary, was now within her grasp. Every shadow, every silence, every careful breath was now a step toward the life she deserved. Could you imagine holding that kind of patience for revenge? How far would you go if it were your justice to claim? The first pale light of dawn began to touch the edges of the cotton fields. Smoke still curled from the ruined smokehouse, a silent signal of Betsy's defiance. She had stepped back into the shadows, watching carefully, making sure no eyes, white or black, had seen her. The plantation's enslaved families stirred quietly, sensing something had changed, though none dared speak aloud. Betsy's mind raced ahead. She had to move quickly, for the patrols would soon scour the area. Every step she had planned in the past 5 years now mattered. Which paths to take, which families to avoid, where she could hide if caught. The woods behind the quarters offered her first sanctuary, thick with pine and oak, familiar only to those born into the life she had endured. She paused briefly near the edge of the forest, taking a deep breath. The night had been her canvas and justice her brush. She let herself feel a spark of hope. For years she had endured, but now, for the first time, the world felt like it could belong to her, even if just for a fleeting moment. Behind her the plantation was awakening. The sounds of distant voices, the clatter of early chores, horses being saddled, all came slowly, almost dreamlike. Betsy moved silently, stepping over roots and fallen leaves, guided by instinct and months of careful preparation. She would not return, not tonight, not ever. Her escape had been orchestrated for a lifetime, and there was no turning back. And somewhere deep in her heart, Betsy carried a promise. Every injustice she had endured would be remembered, every cruelty accounted for, and every step she took toward freedom was a step toward justice for all who had been silenced before her. If you were in Betsy's shoes, would you risk everything for justice, even if it meant leaving everything behind? Betsy moved deeper into the forest, her bare feet silent against the soft, pine needle-covered ground. The air smelled damp and earthy, a stark contrast to the acrid smoke that still clung to the plantation. Every shadow could be a threat, every sound a warning, but Betsy had long learned how to disappear in plain sight. As she navigated through familiar trails, memories of the smokehouse flooded back. The suffocating heat, the choking smoke, the helplessness she had felt every time Harlon imposed his cruelty. But now, the power had shifted. That same fire that once tormented her had become her shield, her weapon, her voice. The forest opened into a narrow stream, and Betsy paused to crouch and drink. The water was cool and clear, washing away the sweat and fear that clung to her skin. She traced the path she had memorized from whispered advice of elders in the quarters. They had taught her to read the land like a book, to anticipate patrols, and to know which animals and birds would give warning signs of approaching humans. Every step brought her closer to freedom, but danger was never far behind. She heard the distant bark of a dog, probably one of Thornton's patrols searching for her. Her heart raced, but she kept moving, blending into the foliage like a ghost. Betsy knew this was more than a physical journey. It was a test of patience, courage, and cunning. One wrong move, one careless glance, and everything could be lost. And yet she smiled slightly to herself. For the first time, she was no longer a victim. Every choice, every risk, every carefully planned move was hers to make. The forest welcomed her into its embrace, holding her secret, protecting her flight. Would you have the courage to escape into the unknown like Betsy did, leaving everything behind? Comment your answer. The forest thickened as Betsy pressed onward, moonlight barely piercing the canopy above. Every snap of a twig underfoot made her flinch, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, letting the rhythm of her heartbeat guide her steps. She knew the patrols wouldn't give up easily, and the thought of dogs tracking her made her move with even more precision. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed through the trees. Betsy froze, heart pounding, her mind calculating every possibility. "Keep calm," she whispered to herself. "Don't give them a reason to see me." She flattened herself against a low branch, using the undergrowth to vanish from view. Hours passed, and the first hint of dawn appeared as a pale grey line along the horizon. Betsy paused by a small clearing to rest and plan her next move. In the distance, she could see the faint outlines of hills leading north, toward the rivers and settlements where freedom might finally be found. Every step forward felt like walking through history itself. She was becoming a part of a story that would survive long after her name was whispered among the enslaved. A soft rustling from nearby startled her. Betsy tensed, ready to flee, but a small rabbit darted past her hiding spot. She let out a quiet breath. Even the smallest signs of life in the wilderness became her companions, witnesses to her daring escape. Every mile she covered strengthened her resolve. Betsy knew that survival required more than speed. It required cunning, knowledge of the land, and a will unbroken by years of cruelty. And as she finally crested a hill and saw the first distant smoke of a northern settlement, a spark of hope ignited in her chest. Freedom wasn't just a dream anymore, it was within reach. Would you risk everything to escape like Betsy did, even knowing danger lurks everywhere? Comment below. The morning sun had barely risen when Betsy reached the edge of a shallow creek, its water sparkling like scattered diamonds. She knelt, cupped her hands, and drank cautiously, careful not to leave any sign of her presence. Her arms trembled, not from thirst, but from the adrenaline that still surged through her veins. In the distance, the first hints of human settlement appeared, smoke rising from chimneys, the faint sound of a blacksmith's hammer echoing in the crisp morning air. Betsy knew she had reached a border, a line between bondage and freedom, but with each step closer, the risk grew. Word of her escape was already spreading, and patrols could be anywhere. Betsy moved silently, sticking to the shadows, observing the people from afar. She spotted a small cabin perched on a hill with smoke curling gently from its chimney. An elderly woman was sweeping the porch. Betsy's heart pounded. This might be her chance, someone willing to help, someone who could offer temporary shelter. She approached cautiously, making her presence known only by a soft cough. The woman turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Betsy's chest tightened. One wrong move, one misread glance, and her freedom could be shattered. Instead of alarm, the woman's expression softened. "Child, you look like you've traveled far," she said, voice kind but cautious. Betsy exhaled quietly, hope blooming in her chest. She nodded, explaining in hushed tones her situation, the smokehouse, the overseer, the fire, and her escape into the wilderness. The woman studied her carefully, then gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. You'll find food and rest, but beware, the roads aren't safe, and you'll need to keep moving." Betsy felt a surge of relief. For the first time since leaving the plantation, she allowed herself a small moment of rest, knowing that the journey north was only beginning, but that she had allies, even if just one. If you were in Betsy's shoes, would you trust a stranger in the middle of the wilderness, or keep running alone? Betsy spent only a few hours resting in the small cabin. The food was simple, cornbread, some dried meat, but it was nourishment enough to fuel her body for the next leg of her journey. She didn't speak much, only enough to assure the elderly woman that she was grateful and aware of the dangers outside. By midday, she had left the cabin, moving cautiously along a narrow dirt trail lined with tall pines. The forest around her was alive with the sounds of birds, insects, and the faint rustle of small animals. Each sound made her flinch. Each shadow could be a patrol or a slave catcher sent by Master Thornton. She forced herself to breathe, to move quietly, and to keep her mind sharp. Hours passed. Her legs ached, her throat was parched, but she pressed on. She crossed shallow streams, climbed low ridges, and avoided the main roads entirely. Betsy knew that sticking to hidden paths was the only way she could evade capture. As the sun began its slow descent, she reached a small clearing. In the distance, she saw a group of people gathered, another community, possibly free blacks or runaway slaves. Her pulse quickened. Could they be the allies she needed, or was this a trap designed to lure her back into danger? She crouched in the shadows, observing. A man in the group noticed her almost immediately, his eyes sharp and assessing. He nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement. Betsy took this as a sign. She stepped forward slowly, hands raised just enough to show she meant no harm. "Come closer," the man called softly. "You're safe here for now." His voice carried authority, but there was warmth beneath it, a promise of protection. Betsy's heart lifted. For the first time, she felt the possibility of freedom, not just survival, but an actual chance to live beyond the fear and cruelty of Rosefield Plantation. Would you risk meeting strangers when your life depends on secrecy, or continue alone through the wilderness? Betsy stepped cautiously into the clearing. The group of people looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Men and women of all ages, some armed with crude weapons, others simply carrying bundles, eyed her carefully. She could feel their cautious trust forming slowly, like a fragile thread. The man who had first noticed her stepped forward. "Name?" he asked. His tone was gentle but firm. Betsy hesitated for a moment, then whispered, Betsy Johnson." The group exchanged glances. One woman, older and sharp-eyed, nodded slowly. "We've heard whispers about you," she said. "They say you burned the overseer. If that's true, you've got courage, but also danger following you." Betsy's chest tightened. Danger was everywhere. She could feel it like a shadow trailing her every step. "I don't have time to explain," she said softly. "I need food, shelter, and a place to plan my next move." The man nodded. "You'll have it, but understand, this is no longer just about you. Your enemies are many, and your story travels faster than you think. If Thornton's men find you here," his voice trailed, leaving the threat unspoken but clear. Betsy took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of relief for the first time in years. She wasn't completely free yet, but for the first time she had allies. People who could guide her through the forests, teach her how to avoid patrols, and perhaps even connect her with the networks of freedom seekers spreading throughout Alabama and beyond. Would you trust strangers in a moment of desperation, or go it alone to keep control of your fate? The night was dense and quiet, broken only by the rustle of leaves and distant animal calls. Betsy followed her new allies through the underbrush, each step calculated, careful. She had learned long ago that every sound, every shadow could be deadly. The group moved swiftly but silently, getting her to a small clearing where a hidden cabin sat, partially camouflaged by trees and tall grass. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, the faint scent of cooked food promising warmth and sustenance. Inside, the cabin was simple but safe. Wooden walls lined with shelves, a single fire pit in the center, and a handful of people huddled around, eating quietly. The leader, a tall man with sharp eyes, approached Betsy. "You're safe here for now," he said. "But you must understand, your story has reached others. There are bounty hunters, overseers, even your master's men looking for you." Betsy's stomach tightened. Danger shadowed her like a persistent specter, but for the first time she felt a spark of hope. She could fight, plan, and maybe even secure true freedom, not just for herself, but for others like her. A young boy no older than 10 peeked from behind a wall. "Are you the one who burned Harlon?" he asked timidly. Betsy nodded slowly. The boy's eyes widened, a mix of fear and admiration. "You're brave," he whispered. The leader motioned for everyone to gather closer. "Listen carefully," he said. "There's a network of safe houses stretching north. You can move from one to another, staying ahead of the hunters, but you must follow instructions precisely. One misstep and," he left the threat hanging, a reminder that freedom came at a price. Betsy clenched her fists. 5 years of oppression had led to this moment. She would no longer be invisible. She would no longer be silenced. Every step she took now would be one toward justice, toward a life defined by her choices, not by someone else's cruelty. Would you risk everything for freedom, even if it meant trusting strangers? The following morning, Betsy awoke to the smell of fresh bread and strong coffee. The cabin, though safe for the night, was not a permanent haven. Her guides reminded her that every hour in one place increased the risk of discovery. After a brief meal, the leader handed Betsy a bundle of supplies, dried food, a water flask, and a small knife hidden in the folds of a cloth. "Keep your wits about you," he warned. "The path ahead is dangerous, and not everyone you meet can be trusted." Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, a maze of shadows and light. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf reminded Betsy of what she had escaped and what still hunted her. She moved with purpose, the bundle secured tightly, her senses alert to every sound. As they reached the edge of the clearing, a sudden noise made Betsy freeze. A figure emerged from the trees, a young man, tall, lean, with eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. He carried no weapons, but Betsy's instincts screamed caution. "You're Betsy?" he asked, voice low, almost hesitant. She nodded. "I've been sent to guide you to the next safe house," he continued. "But we must move quickly. Hunters have been spotted near the river path, and time is short." Betsy followed silently, her heart racing with both fear and determination. As they navigated through the dense forest, memories of Harlon and the smokehouse fire filled her mind, fueling her resolve. She had risked everything for this moment. She would not falter now. By nightfall, they reached a hidden clearing where a small boat waited by the riverbank. The guide motioned her to step in. "This river will take you closer to freedom. Stay in the boat and don't make a sound. Any noise could mean death." As Betsy settled into the boat, she took a deep breath, letting the cold night air fill her lungs. The river reflected the pale moonlight, shimmering like a path toward a new life. She understood that the journey ahead would test her courage, intelligence, and endurance in ways she had never imagined. Would you trust a stranger completely if your life depended on it? The river carried Betsy silently through the night, the gentle lapping of water against the wooden boat, the only sound she could hear. Her guide kept a vigilant watch, his eyes scanning the tree line for any movement. Every rustle of leaves made her heart skip a beat. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly. The moon rose high above, illuminating the path in silver, yet shadows lurked everywhere. Betsy clutched her bundle tightly, knowing that one misstep could cost her everything. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed across the water. Betsy froze, gripping the edges of the boat. "Hunters," the guide whispered. "They've spotted smoke from the fire last night. They'll be searching every road and river." The guide steered the boat toward a hidden inlet, barely visible among the overhanging branches. The darkness swallowed them as they drifted into a narrow channel, its waters calm and deep. Betsy felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease slightly, though she knew safety was still far away. As they approached the bank, the guide signaled for silence. "We'll wait here until dawn," he said. "The next stretch is more dangerous. There's a small settlement nearby, but we must be careful. Some residents aren't sympathetic to your cause." Betsy's mind raced with questions. Could she truly trust the people in this settlement? Would they hide her or betray her? The weight of her journey pressed down, but beneath it all, a spark of hope burned brighter than ever. She thought of the smokehouse, of the fire, and of Harlon's final screams. That memory fueled her determination. Whatever dangers lay ahead, she would not turn back. Freedom was within reach, and she would face every obstacle with courage. What would you risk to gain your freedom? The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow on the riverbank where Betsy and her guide had been hiding. The morning air was cool and heavy with mist, and every sound seemed amplified in the quiet of the woods. Betsy stepped onto the soft mud, her bare feet sinking slightly with each careful step. Her eyes scanned the shadows, searching for signs of the hidden settlement the guide had spoken of. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig made her pause, remembering the hunters who might still be searching for her. Finally, through a break in the trees, she saw it, a small cluster of cabins, smoke rising gently from their chimneys. People moved about, tending gardens and livestock, unaware of the danger that might soon arrive at their door. The guide whispered, "We stay cautious. Not everyone here will welcome you." Betsy's heart pounded. She had spent 5 years planning, 5 years building silent courage, and now every step mattered. As they approached the first cabin, a woman emerged, carrying a basket of fresh herbs. Her eyes widened briefly at the sight of Betsy, but she quickly composed herself. "You must be careful," the guide said softly. "These people can help, or they can turn you in. Watch and learn who to trust." The woman approached, her gaze sharp yet not unkind. "You're far from home," she said. And in these parts, strangers are met with suspicion first, questions later. Betsy nodded, hiding the fear clawing at her chest. She needed allies, but misstep and the freedom she sought would slip through her fingers. Inside the settlement, Betsy saw families who had fled bondage, people who knew the language of secrecy and survival. Some gave her wary looks, others whispered quietly among themselves, watching her every move. Betsy realized that here, in this fragile pocket of safety, every interaction was a test. She could feel the fire still burning within her, not the destructive fire of the smokehouse, but the resilient fire of defiance. Betsy knew that to survive the day, she would need to play her role carefully, silent, cautious, observant, yet ready to act if opportunity or danger presented itself. Would you trust strangers if your life depended on it? Comment below. Like and subscribe. In part 16, Betsy will face her first real challenge within the settlement, an unexpected threat that could expose her identity. Betsy had settled into the small settlement, keeping to herself as she observed the daily routines. She learned quickly when to speak, when to remain silent, and whom to watch. Every face held a story, and every shadow could hide a threat. By mid-morning, a group of young men gathered near the central fire pit, sharpening tools and murmuring quietly. Betsy noticed one of them casting suspicious glances in her direction. Her heart skipped a beat. Could they sense she was new? Was she already under scrutiny? The guide leaned close, whispering, "Trust is earned here, Betsy. One wrong move and the bounty hunters could be at the door. Always stay alert." Suddenly, a distant shout echoed through the trees. Everyone froze. Betsy's pulse quickened. The settlement had been cautious for a reason. They knew the outside world would not leave them unmolested. She glanced toward the source of the sound, a rider on horseback, approaching fast, kicking up dust along the path. The settlement's elders rushed to organize a quick defense, quietly ushering families into hiding. Betsy ducked behind a stack of firewood, gripping a small knife she had taken from the guide. She felt the old thrill of danger, the same rush that had guided her through the smokehouse, and it reminded her why she had risked everything. The rider slowed at the edge of the settlement, scanning the cabins carefully. Betsy could see his face now, a bounty hunter, marked by hardened eyes and a cruel mouth. She froze, realizing that any exposure could mean capture or death. Every step, every breath was a calculated risk. The guide placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Follow my lead, move silently, and you will be safe. Don't draw attention, no matter what." Betsy nodded, heart hammering in her chest. She had faced fire before, but now she was confronting the living danger of the outside world, an enemy who would kill to reclaim her freedom. For a tense few minutes, the settlement seemed to hold its collective breath. The hunter's eyes scanned left and right, lingering suspiciously, but he saw nothing. Slowly, he spurred his horse onward, disappearing into the misty morning. Betsy exhaled quietly, realizing how close she had come to disaster. It was in this moment that Betsy understood. Freedom was not simply escape. It was survival, every day, every hour, every second. And now, in this settlement, she would have to fight, watch, and plan again. Her war was far from over. The settlement had quieted down after the morning scare, but Betsy knew the danger was far from gone. The hunter's presence was a reminder that freedom was fragile, like glass, easily shattered by one careless step. By afternoon, the elders called a secret council. Betsy was invited to speak because of her courage, and the story of the smokehouse had already spread among the settlement's people. They sat around a circle, faces lined with years of hardship, eyes wary but hopeful. "We've lived too long in hiding," one elder said, voice low but firm. "But now the bounty hunters grow bolder. We must decide, do we fortify or do we send scouts to track them before they find us?" Betsy's heart raced. She had been a slave, trained to obey, to hide, to accept injustice. Now she had a voice. Now she had a choice. Her mind flashed back to the smokehouse, to the fire she had wielded with precision, to the fear and the fury that had guided her hands. "I've faced the master and his overseer," she said quietly, "and I survived. We must be smart, but we cannot live in fear. I volunteer to scout the area. I know how to move unseen." A murmur ran through the circle. Some feared the boldness, others admired it. The elder nodded slowly. Betsy, your bravery is known, but remember, one mistake can cost lives, not just yours. The decision rests with you. Are you ready? Betsy looked around at the faces in the circle, children, men, women, all depending on her. She swallowed hard. The weight of responsibility was heavier than any chains she had worn. She nodded, her resolve firm. I am ready, for all of us. That evening, under the cover of twilight, Betsy prepared herself. She checked her small knife, wrapped herself in a dark cloak, and memorized the paths through the dense woods surrounding the settlement. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, every bird call could betray her position. As the sun set, she slipped silently into the forest, moving like a shadow. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the faint scent of smoke and pine sap. She thought of Harlon, of the overseer locked in the fire, and then of the freedom she had fought for. Every step she took reminded her that she was no longer a victim. She was a strategist, a protector, a force to be reckoned with. Hours passed, the forest growing darker, the moon rising high. Suddenly, a faint light flickered in the distance, a campfire but not theirs. Betsy crouched behind a thick oak, watching carefully. Figures moved around the fire, armed and alert, bounty hunters. Her pulse raced. The freedom she had fought for, the lives of everyone in the settlement, hung in the balance. Betsy realized she had stepped from one battle into another, and this one would test every skill, every nerve, every ounce of courage she possessed. Betsy's eyes never left the flickering campfire in the distance. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound amplified by the stillness of the forest. She crouched behind the oak, heart hammering. These weren't ordinary men. They were bounty hunters, trained to track escapees, and their instincts were deadly. She thought of the settlement behind her, the people depending on her. Every second wasted could bring them closer to danger. She took a deep breath and stepped lightly over the forest floor, moving silently between the trees, her cloak blending into the darkness. Reaching the edge of the clearing, Betsy crouched low. She saw 3 men around the fire, one sharpening a knife, another checking a musket, the third rifling through papers, maps, bounty notices, and some crude sketches of the settlement. Her stomach tightened. They knew someone was missing, someone important. Betsy counted them carefully, 3 men, weapons ready, firelight dancing across their hardened faces. She needed a plan, and fast. She remembered the trap she had set for Harlon, the smokehouse. Perhaps, she thought, she could turn this same cunning against them. Quietly, she picked up a handful of dry pine cones, tossing them gently into a patch of leaves a few meters from the fire. A small crackle, a flicker. One of the hunters looked up, alarmed, reaching for his musket. Betsy used the moment, darting across the clearing to the far side, keeping herself hidden behind fallen logs and thick shrubs. From this vantage, she observed their movements, memorizing every detail, the positions of their weapons, the gaps in their attention, the rhythm of their patrol around the campfire. She realized she could use the terrain to her advantage. Set traps or mislead them, just like she had done years ago in the smokehouse. Hours passed. The moon climbed high, and fatigue started gnawing at the hunters. Betsy crept closer, her mind a chessboard, planning every move, every feint. She paused behind a boulder, her ears straining. Suddenly, a voice muttered, "They're watching us, I feel it." The hunters looked around nervously. Betsy smirked under her hood. They had no idea how close she really was. Seizing the moment, she lit a small bundle of dry leaves she had prepared earlier and tossed it near the edge of the clearing. Flames flickered, smoke curling into the night air. Panic erupted. One hunter fired a warning shot, while the others scrambled to contain the fire. In the chaos, Betsy slipped unseen back toward the settlement, every step taking her closer to safety, every step a victory for the people she had sworn to protect. When she finally reached the edge of the forest near the settlement, she paused to catch her breath. The hunters were distracted, their attention divided, and Betsy's information would give the elders the upper hand. Tonight, she had not only survived, she had outsmarted them. Betsy finally reached the settlement, her breathing heavy but controlled. The wooden hut stood silently under the moonlight, the fire from her diversion still flickering in the distance. She paused at the edge, taking stock. Every face she saw carried the weight of survival, the fear of the hunters, and a cautious hope that someone had made it back safely. She ran toward the leader of the settlement, an older man named Josiah, who had been like a father to many of the escapees. "Josiah," she whispered urgently, "they're here, 3 of them, armed and dangerous, but they fell for my trap. We have a chance to strike first." Josiah's eyes widened. "Betsy, you risked everything." "I had to, there's no time to waste," she replied, her voice firm. She handed him the crude map she had snatched from the hunters' camp, a detailed layout of the surrounding forests, patrol patterns, and escape routes. "This will let us plan. We can turn their hunting into their own trap." The elders gathered quickly, forming a council under the soft glow of the campfire. Betsy outlined the plan, marking spots for ambushes and decoys. Every movement she had studied in the forest, every twitch of the hunters' attention, every flaw in their strategy, she now used as ammunition for the coming fight. Meanwhile, the rest of the settlement prepared quietly, reinforcing the cabins, setting warning signals, and quietly moving children and the elderly to hidden locations. Betsy's presence had ignited a spark of determination. The settlement was no longer waiting passively. They were becoming the hunters. As dawn approached, the 3 men emerged from the forest, still trying to regroup after the chaos of the night. Betsy watched from a hidden ridge, heart steady, calculating the perfect moment. She signaled Josiah, and the settlement moved. From all directions, hidden figures emerged, silent shadows with spears, rocks, and makeshift weapons. The hunters' confusion turned to fear. One fired a shot, missing wildly. Another tripped over a hidden root. The third stumbled into a carefully concealed pit. Betsy had orchestrated it perfectly. Every step of the hunters' approach had been anticipated. By the time the first light of sunrise touched the treetops, the hunters were disarmed, surrounded, and forced to surrender. Betsy stepped forward, her eyes meeting the lead hunter. "You thought you could control us," she said quietly, "but you underestimated the courage of those you oppressed." The captured men were bound and held under watch. The settlement's people celebrated quietly, relief and empowerment shining in their eyes. Betsy, though exhausted, allowed herself a small smile. She had turned the tables. Justice had been served, not through chaos, but through planning, intelligence, and the courage to act when others would have stayed hidden. The morning sun glinted off the treetops as Betsy and the settlement's people prepared for their final move. The captured hunters were secured, but Betsy knew this wasn't over. The authorities in Alabama would soon be alerted, and staying even a single night could mean capture or worse. She gathered a small group of trusted escapees, including Josiah, and checked their supplies: dried meat, water, blankets, and a handful of stolen maps and tools. Every step, every choice was critical. "We move now," she whispered, "before anyone knows we've won." They slipped into the forest, silent and swift, shadows among shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call reminded Betsy of the dangers still ahead. But her mind was steady. Years of planning, years of suffering, had sharpened her instincts like a knife. Crossing rivers, dodging patrols, and navigating through dense woods, the group made it northward. The nights were cold, but they kept moving, guided by the stars and Betsy's unyielding determination. Along the way, they encountered other escaped slaves and abolitionist sympathizers who provided shelter, food, and advice. Weeks passed and the land changed. They left the oppressive plantations behind and entered freer states where the Fugitive Slave Act had not yet reached its shadow. Betsy finally allowed herself a deep breath. Freedom wasn't just the absence of chains, it was the chance to live on your own terms, to rebuild, and to be seen as human. When they reached Philadelphia, Betsy and her companions were greeted by a small but welcoming community of freed slaves. New identities were assumed. Betsy became Betsy Johnson, taking her future into her own hands. Here, she could work, learn, and live without fear. The fire she had started at Rosefield Plantation had been more than vengeance. It had been a spark that guided her to freedom. Years later, Betsy would look back at that night and the smoke rising from the old smokehouse. She would remember the fear, the courage, and the meticulous planning that had allowed her to escape. Most importantly, she would remember that one act of defiance had changed not just her fate, but inspired countless others to fight for their freedom. And though the fires of Alabama had long since died, the legend of Betsy, the woman who turned fire into liberation, lived on. Her story became a symbol of resistance, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice. What would you have done if you were Betsy? Risk everything for freedom or wait for another chance? Comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to hear more untold stories of courage and revenge.